how interpersonal coordination comes about. Above that, also when people talk about teamwork and how to achieve teamwork and how to improve teamwork, the metaphor of a rowing crew is often used to highlight that. But actually, there's not much known in literature about the actual dynamics in crew rowing. So that's what my talk will be about. So to be utterly clear, I'm not talking about this part. All right. So rowing. I'm going to examine crew coordination. But first, some background information about rowing. In rowing, like in any competitive sports, it's of course the goal is to win, to be at the finish first. So you have to row as fast as possible with your crew. How do you do that? Well, first you have to propel the boat, of course. You have to use power as a crew to overcome the drag that the boat has with respect to the water. But you also need to lose as little as possible of the power that is produced. So you need a proper technique. And for a crew, this means that it's not only the technique of each individual in the boat, but it's also the coordination with respect to each other that influences that technique, the crew technique. And it's generally accepted in rowing practice as well as in rowing science that the perfect synchronization of the crew is the best performance. But there's actually very little known about how well the crew actually synchronizes. So I think the coordination dynamics it provides expedient tools for that, to analyze that. So this is where this comes in. So I'm very much motivated by the work of Richard Schmidt and Mike Richardson and others, of course. Especially the rocking chair paradigm. I especially like that. And there's lots of similarities, as you will see. Okay, so how to analyze that? Well, first I have to take care now because left is right and right. Now here it is. Because analyzing on the water is quite difficult. So we you can see a little bit of art here. Okay, analyzing on the water is not as easy as it seems. You have to have a lot of equipment and money for that. So what we typically do is get the rowers to a lab and put them on ergometers that are put on slides. So actually that means they can move with respect to the earth. That's an advantage because that also is happens on water. And I will get to that later on that aspect. The other thing is that you can couple the two rowers as one boat. So now we have a system that can resemble what happens on water in crew rowing. All right. The typical sort of data that you get then is, displacements of the rowers on the boat. So you can see the displacement of one rower here. And the other rower, because they're synchronized, is exactly behind that line. You can see it over here. And the dotted line that you can see here is the movement of the boat, because the rowers push off against the boat, against the ergometers, so the ergometers move with respect to the boat as well. And then you can calculate the relative phase between those rowers. And this is typical for this relative phase. Near to zero indicates perfect synchronization, not that much variability, so it's actually very well synchronized here. So that's an example of the typical data that we get here. So, what does this mean for rowers if we talk about coordination dynamics now? And we're talking about coordination between pairs of water now. So we can look at how novel pairs and experienced pairs row. And it's quite evident that you could expect that the relative phase in the coordination will be more variable and less stable for novel pairs. We checked that, and this is okay. I will leave it that for now. It indicates that this way of analyzing is a rather good way of indicating the coordination between the rowers. There's no more information in that other than people that are better perform better. So I'll leave it for that. What's interesting here, and what I will stipulate in this talk, is that coordination dynamics predict that there are going to be instabilities in coordination when the higher stroke rates are in use. So the relative phase will be more variable, And that's not, well, it's not good for performance because it might well, affect that. So this is what we checked with this setup that you just saw a few slides ago. And we analyzed the relative phase in terms of standard deviation. We also calculated entropy measures, but I will just show you the relative phases here, of the standard deviations here. And we had them perform, we had different pairs perform rowing movements, synchronized rowing movements at different stroke rates. Just a ramp trial. Started off at 30 strokes a minute, which is already quite fast. And then they had to increase every 20 seconds to strokes a minute of that. So to as fast as possible. And some people got up to approximately, well, near to 50 strokes a minute. It's exceedingly fast. I cannot do that. And what you can see here is that the standard deviation, well, for some pairs, like this one, and you have to watch closely, like this one, standard deviation, so the variability increases with stroke rate. This is what we would expect from coupled oscillator dynamics. For some pairs, it decreases. For most of them, it tends to stay approximately at the same level. So there's not much happening here. Okay, we leave that for now. I'll come back to that later. Because there's another thing from coordination dynamics that's often used, and that's the following. There's a differential pattern stability. So different patterns are related to different stability levels. What we know, most of you will know, is that in phase is predicted to be more stable than anti-phase, and all other patterns, other relative phase patterns, are unstable. So you can also apply that to rowing. What is that? Yes, you can also apply that to rowing. So we'll show you how you can do that. And this is actually part 2 of my talk. And then we'll go through the myth, what I would like to call the myth of syncopated rowing. And to get into that idea, I first have to explain a few things to you. First of all, the power balance on the water. So I already told you that to produce a certain amount of mechanical power as a crew, part of that power is put into propelling of the boat. And it's, I like to call it active power. But there's also power losses. That's approximately 25% of the produced power. Which is quite a lot. 20% is lost to slippage of the blades in the water, which is inevitable. But I'd like to focus on this part, because 5% of the power is lost to speed fluctuations of the boat. So to illustrate that, for those of you that are not that familiar with crew rowing, with my lost pen. Here it is. Okay. So look at these boats. This is Athens 94. You can see that the boats are constantly accelerating and decelerating. They don't have a constant speed. Be aware that I'm talking about the speed of the boats, not of the boat rover system. So the boats accelerate and decelerate. Okay. If you measure this, the acceleration and deceleration of the boat, like Holger Hill did, so I borrowed this graph from his article, you can see there's lots of fluctuations in boat speed. Actually, it fluctuates for a stroke rate of 31 strokes a minute. It fluctuates between 5.8 and 3.4 meters a second. That's almost a factor 2. And this struck me because it's quite a lot, actually. These speed fluctuations of the boat are caused by, well, evidently, the cyclical nature of the rowing act. You have a propulsion phase, a recovering phase, etc. But important to know is that in the rowing boat you are seated on a sliding seat, which means that you can use your leg muscles to produce power, which is, you need that to go as fast as possible. But this means that you're pushing off against the boat altogether. So every time you produce the propulsion with the crew, you're decelerating the boat. And then accelerating the boat again, and then decelerating the boat. So that's where these velocity fluctuations come from. Why is this important? Well, we know that the drag to overcome, the power to overcome the drag of the hull with respect to the water is proportional to the velocity of the hull to the third, so Q. which means that if you would have constant velocity, constant bow speed, you would need less power. Which also means that with the same amount of total produced power, you go faster. So there's some rowing research going on in how to reduce these velocity fluctuations then, because it can gain 5% extra efficiency. Well, one of these ways is to row anti-phase, out of phase. And this is not a new idea, on the contrary. So what you will see here is a movie from the year 1933. Some experiments done in England. And you can see here that the crew is rowing in a quarter cycle pattern. Not really going fast. Here's the winner. So it didn't really work out. They managed to get the pattern going after well, some months of training. But they didn't go very fast because they couldn't reach as high stroke rates as the persons that went in synchronization. Okay, so this is the two patterns related to each other. And we know from coordination dynamics that the 90 degrees pattern is intrinsically unstable. From bimanual coordination we know that. And I don't know of any studies that check that in between persons coordination. So if anyone knows, I'd be very happy to know. What you have to do then is not perform the 90 degrees pattern, of course, main stable pattern, but another stable pattern, antiphase rowing. So you have to divide the team in two, and those two parts have to row antiphase with respect to each other. And the predictions, the mechanical predictions, are that this reduction in speed fluctuation that is accompanied by will result in 3 to 10 seconds on a 2,000 meter race. 10 seconds is, well, is even beyond the difference between gold and silver. So, and well, the predictions that we made is more close to the 10 seconds than to the 3 seconds. So it's really worthwhile. So we checked that as well as in an experiment. So this is from a study I did with Matthijs Hofmeister in Amsterdam. So here you see, this is published in PLOS One this year. Here you see the typical in-phase rowing, and this is the anti-phase rowing. You can see that the ergometer system is well, approximately standing still, which is more efficient. Yeah. So this you already saw, and if you then look at the anti-phase rowing, you can now see that the relative phase between those two rows indeed shows more fluctuations. There's some structure in there as well. I will not go into that. But it is more variable. So this may be, well, a bad influence on the coordination. But the most important thing in that study was that we wanted to check whether the power that was produced was more efficiently produced. So what you see here is the total power produced by the rowers, on average, over 12 pairs. Also, no, this is no study. 9 pairs. Here's the power in phase and the power in antiphase, and you can see it doesn't deviate that much. Actually, there's one significant, so that's good to know. So actually, a more difficult pattern was not that difficult to perform because they could achieve the same power level. What's more important is that the power that was dissipated by the flywheels, which relates to the power that is dissipated for the oars on water, was way higher. In phase, you lose a lot of power. So this is what we were looking for. So antiphase is indeed way, like 5% more efficient. But does this hold still at high stroke rates? Is it still stable enough, that pattern at high stroke rates? We checked that. I showed you this before. This is the in-phase pattern, and here you see the result for the antiphase. So it is increasing stroke rate. What you can see here is that for some, if any, it decreases. The variability decreases with increasing stroke rate, which is quite striking. And if you look at the movements of the boat, the velocity fluctuation, so the standard deviation of velocity of the ergometers, you can see here, antiphase, it's rather low. We expected that. But for in-phase, these velocity fluctuations increase quite a lot. So actually, the benefits of anti-phase increase with stroke rate. And I have to say, there were two breakdowns. There were two transitions to in-phase, which indicates that it relates to coordination dynamics again. And I will skip the reasons for that, but that might be an important issue in the discussion. Okay, so my conclusions. I hope you agree that this is a nice way to analyze rowing coordination. And for rowing coordination, we showed now that coordinate stability was not completely at least, in line with the frequency-related Poel oscillating predictions. There was actually more stability towards a critical point, which is weird because you wouldn't expect that for a dynamical system. You would expect less stability towards more entropy towards a critical point. Well, I'm not sure yet how to interpret it, but that might be a point for discussion as well. For practice, row anti-phase, because you will go way faster. And the effect is even stronger for higher stroke rates, so that's best for competition rowing at these high stroke rates. A more general note I'd like to note here is that perfectly symmetric synchronization, although it may be more stable, is not always the optimal solution for a problem of course. And with respect to anti-phase on water, well, we have to check that. There are still some points to check, of course. But if you, for instance, take such a boat, which is just a commercially available boat for 3 persons, and you get out the middle one, you have enough space to row anti-phase. So actually, I think this is plausible. I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Hi. So transitions occur in ways other than destabilization. So there's this time scale which is longer, measured by the first passage time, which allows you to have transitions in a probabilistic fashion from one attractor to another that doesn't require destabilization. Okay. And you may be getting into some type of transition which is working in a way other than the typical way that we see because you do see this even in bimanual coordination, that you do see transitions from antiphase to in-phase when people are in stable antiphase. Yeah. And so if you have people perform the coordination long enough in antiphase, there is a probable a chance that they're going to transition to in-phase just by virtue of this, what is called the measure of the first passage time. So it may be something like that. The other thing that occurs to me is that when they're going fast in antiphase, that you probably have a certain cognitive noise, if you will. Right? That is to say, these people have been trained perhaps, are they skilled rowers?
They are skilled rowers, yeah.
If they've been trained, they have a very deep attractor for in-phase. Right, and they're in a stable antiphase, but there's this other attractor that is there, which has a strength with regards to their history, and if they do it long enough, you can imagine they, well, colloquially speaking, get confused, right, and switch to something which is easier for them.
I agree with you. It requires some training, of course. And that's also what happened in the past, in the previous century. There's also some Russian Soviet women that tried this in the 80s in Moscow. But they had been training for 2 months and then just decided to quit because it didn't work yet. So it does require training. I agree with that. And I also had to note here, you might like that, we also had some novices, people that were able to row on an ergometer, but never rowed with someone else or whatsoever. And we analyzed them, and they actually showed attraction to anti-phase. So yeah, they liked that better as well. So it is getting used to that synchronization is really a thing for rowers, because it defines the sport essentially. And you can see, for instance, this words. This particular pair here only got for interface up to 32 strokes a minute, and then they showed the transition to in-phase. It was not necessarily because they induced the frequency or increased the frequency, but they told me that they were just so reluctant to that anti-phase pattern that they just decided to stop. Okay. And you have these kind of things.
So a student of mine who was a coxswain argues that it's the vestibular coupling between people in the boat that is more important than the visual coupling for synchronization. So in the lab, right, when you coupled your two rigs together, was one person influencing the vestibular stimulation of the other person? So was one person's rowing affecting the acceleration of the other person? Because that might be very different on the water, and might be harder to maintain an antiphase pattern when you've got that vestibular coupling.
Good point, because an antiphase, I will show you the movie again. An antiphase, actually, when you perform that in the lab, the ergometer stays perfectly still, so you move your own mass. And you don't have the mechanical nor haptical feedback towards the other rower, which you do have in synchronous rowing. So actually, when you're rowing synchronously, let's say we're in a boat. If I row and yours, you do nothing, you still get moved by me. So mechanically, so that's a very strong thing going on as well mechanically and
So that might be very different on the water and make it much harder to achieve an antiphase pattern on the water.
Perhaps, yeah. But that doesn't way more.
One last, very fast and very short.
Yeah, just a bit. I was wondering whether the speed fluctuation could be reduced. But the speed fluctuation could be reduced by boat shape design.
Boat shape design, the speed
Yes,
fluctuation?
changing the shape of the boat. Because that's standard practice in Formula 1 racing and everything. The speed is controlled by also.
Actually, I don't get any money for this kind of research, but the people that design the boats do. Yeah, that's right.
I was wondering whether you are aware of some attempts doing this kind of
Well,
thing.
actually, the boats are designed already quite optimally in that sense. And it doesn't need very much other things to optimize speed fluctuations, or in the right way, of course. So they're already designed in such a way that that speed fluctuations are related to as less drag as possible.
Okay. Thanks once again, Harjo.